With the afternoon session, the first speaker for this afternoon will be another one of our co-host plenary speakers for the program in Semiotics and Communication Theory at the University of Toronto. We are delighted that this important field of semiotics, which has much in principle in relationship with the system sciences, has only begun very recently to participate and cooperate with the ISSS, especially through Soren Breyer, whose name I'm sure I have mispronounced, who was with us at Asilomar last year, and now happily we have the semiotics program at the University of Toronto also involved, and so it's with great pleasure that I have the opportunity to introduce Marcel Danesi, who is the program director and has been for the last 20 years, and he's been involved in all facets of semiotics. And his latest work is a co-authored book with Tom Sebiok called The Forms of Meaning. There are some very exciting developments going on in his program, which he may allude to in his talk, but he has just established a new Institute for the Communications and Information Sciences that will be a multidisciplinary venue at the University of Toronto, and he has a new journal that will be published by Mouton called Communications and Information Sciences. So it's with great pleasure that I now introduce Professor Danesi.
First, let me, as a co-host, let me welcome you to Toronto. This is the first time as a co-host I'd have to do absolutely nothing except show up. So it's great to be a co-host in this way. I'm delighted. Secondly, I assure Peter Corning that I will register today by the end of the day. My topic is about communication, human communication, and I'll tell you right away, because I've only got half an hour. This is not Italian time. I'm Italian, so I'll try to keep on real time. Four things. Number one, the association theory of the Gestalt psychologists. I think still brilliant. Number two, a book I picked up many years ago by one of your plenary speakers who was a U of T professor in psychology, Anatol Rapoport, simply called Semiotics. That book simply changed my career. I've been a linguist for 30 years, but a semiotician in a real, I think, in an exciting field because of that book for the last 20 years. The third thing is my grandson, who once mentioned something. He was 17 months old. I used to make him juice in the morning, squeeze juice for him. And he could name juice. And we have a cat who's orange colored. The cat came by, and one day he looked at me, and said, juice. And I said, my God. This is the default mode of thinking, which, of course, from Aristotle on has been called metaphorical. So that has influenced what I'm going to say about communication. And the fourth thing, I forgot. The fourth thing, yes, I've been a language teacher for many years. I've taught Italian at the University of Toronto for a long time, at least 3 decades. I've always noticed one problem in teaching. I can teach the grammar easily, and students can become extremely fluent in the use of a grammar, of a foreign language grammar. But when they speak with that new grammar, they're thinking in English. So they could be verbally fluent, but not conceptually fluent. So I said, there's the discrepancy of all communication theories. I'm not going to be critical. Semioticians like to be critical? Absolutely not. I'm going to be wasting everybody's time to say that all models of communication are meaningless to semiotician unless they deal with what I've just called conceptual fluency. How we deliver that in communication is a secondary nature. I'm going to deal with meaning in that. And so, as a language teacher over the years, I've noticed several things that have occurred. And I'm going to call I'm going to try to describe to you what it means to be conceptually fluent. In other words, to enter into a communication, a human communication. After all, Saussure, one of the founders of semiotics, said that we enter into communication, it's like playing chess. We're not worried about the actual way we play chess. What's more important are the rules of the game. And for many years, linguistics, all the cognitive sciences have been concerned with the rules of the games. Then they relegate performance factors, execution factors, to the marginal domains, usually double-barrel psycholinguistics, sociolinguistics, which end up not studying the actual performance. Because, in my view, they've never been language teachers and had to dirty themselves with actual performance as it occurs. So I'm going to deal with that. I'm going to start with an hypothesis. I'm going to say that all of this takes a while to warm up. It's like my Italian. Yeah, I have an espresso machine. It takes a while. So, yeah, okay. So I'll wait. Maybe. Are we on? Oh, this way. Okay. It's probably upside down. There we go. I'm going to claim that everything, meaning is gained not in an absolute way by mapping a signifier to a signified. That's the traditional view of semiotics. You get a form, you attach it to a content, the combination of the two creates the meaning. I'm going to say that meaning is created by loops, things referring to others. When the student speaks, the student uses a linear form of communication, the student of a foreign language, has to organize it. But underneath it, the thought is all associative. So how do we go from all this kind of mucked up thinking, all associative, organized in a linear fashion? How do we go from there to that? And I'll show you what I mean by that. Everything is a loop. If you look in a dictionary and look for the definition of cat, it'll say the cat is a kind of mammal with retractile claws or something. Then you'll say, okay, but what's a mammal? So a mammal is an animal. This is a tradition. This is well known, but I'm going to go through it anyhow. Well, an animal is an organism. Oh yeah, okay, but what's an organism? An organism is something that has the property of life. What is something that has the property of life? Oh, as an example, we have an organism. You had entered a loop. There's no way out. There's no way out. This is, by the way, I'll call it a denotative chain. It's an easy one. You can close it. It happens in all human systems. Mathematics, Kurt Gödel showed it that it happens in mathematics. We loop. There's no way out of it. We create our own systems, as Giambattista Vico said, and then we live by them. And we're caught in them. So you can expand upon this, and dictionaries, good dictionaries do. And for example, a cat will have, you can take the mammal part, it has whiskers, a tail, it's an animal, organism, life. You can expand it as much as you want, but at a certain point you cannot get out of there and understand cat in its, what can I call it, in its epistemological and its teleological essence. Sorry for these terms. I have no clue how to understand cat unless on the way I hook it up in my mind and in my culture. Now, what are the characteristics? I'll call it a network. I'll call it even network theory. Although I understand what theory means from Greek to see, it means not, it's my seeing. I understand that. Of course, nowadays, if you don't have a theory, they'll say you have nothing, so I have to say it's a theory. Fine. The mammal, animal, life, and organism nodes, I'll say, form a primary circuit. Why primary? Because I need that to understand whatever it is, as Peirce called it, the object in the world. And Peirce was one of the first to show that eventually, as you interpret, your interpretants take you right back to square one. So there's some Peircean theory in here. The whisker and tail nodes that I saw later are offshoots. We may want this detail or not. If you're thinking in psychology and prototypical theory, we've got, what is it? We've got superordinate, these are basic, and then subordinate concepts. There are many ways of talking about the same things. And then, of course, All the nodes are connected to cat, which is the conceptual focus of the network. If I was talking about something else, cat would be in another part of my mind. Okay. So the term theory is not used in its strictly scientific sense, but rather in its original etymological sense, a view. Network theory is not a theory of concepts. It is a descriptive apparatus for literally viewing on paper what dictionary makers have known for sectionaries, namely that the meaning of something is impossible to pin down without reference to other meanings. Fine. The position of nodes, the configuration of circuits. I love diagrams like this. I mean, that's the only thing I can draw, are these diagrams. And the distances among the nodes and circuits in a network reflect no necessary pattern or intrinsic structure. I don't believe my own diagrams. Okay. In the diagram above, the mammal node could have been located virtually anywhere vis-a-vis the other primary nodes to which it is interconnected. The only thing that is relevant about such diagrams is how the nodes are interrelated to each other. Okay. Now, there is no limit, maximum limit to the number and types of nodes. I'm just describing the kind of apparatus I'm going to use to develop what I call conceptual fluency and how it's delivered in communication. It depends on a host of factors, not the least of which is the knowledge of the network maker. In the above network, the secondary circuit generated by mammal, for example, could have been extended to contain carnivorous, rodent eater. The life node could have been extended to generate a secondary circuit of its own containing nodes such as animate, breath, existence in no particular order. Other nodes such as feline, carnivorous, Siamese, tabby could have been inserted to give more detailed picture of the conceptual structure of cat and so on. Fine. Network design will vary according to case and necessity. The above network has cat as its focal point because it is the concept under consideration. Such a node can be called a focal node, if you like. Focal nodes will be identified whenever necessary with a thicker circumference if you want. Any ways to do it. Colors. Some of my students use colors to do this. That's fine. Whatever. Who knows what's in here? Huh? But color seems to be very, very attractive. However, if animal were the focal node, then cat would be represented differently as a non-focal node connected to a circuit that would also include dog, horse, among other associated nodes, and so on. By the way, all of this is variable and or unpredictable, and it depends who you are, where you are, and so on. Now, having said that, let's do a complete as possible denotative network. Here's where semiotics comes in. If all thought were denotative, like I just did before, game over. Wonderful. We could talk to each other using grammar textbooks and say, this is what I'm going to say. You know exactly what I'm going to say. Here's my dictionary. We map it. You understand me, don't you? Yes. Game over. Maybe 1.001% of speech is that way. The rest is virtually all connotative. In fact, the whole of cultural systems are connotative networks which lead all over the place. I'll leave that for now and simply assume that denotative networks do exist in the mind as dictionary makers make them. And one for blue would have things like this. As a focal, it would be a hue, it would have a color, shade, dark, azure, etc., the kinds of shades. It will be associated with the sky, the sea, and other kinds of colors like yellow and green and so on. However, when I use blue, in actual communication, things like this happen. He's a real cool cat. Sorry, I'm using cat and blue together, okay? Cat and blue together. He's a real cool cat. Today I've got the blues. She let the cat out of the bag. That hit me right out of the blue. And there isn't one student learning English as a second language who would have any access at all to those networks. None. They're completely missing. Look at your textbooks in language and you'll see that they're missing from there too. So, what's happening here? Are they disconnected? Are these new meanings? New? I would say fundamental meanings. How are they connected to this? Well, first of all, let's look at what happens here. In the case of, you would have to go to another network domain where music, jazz, and blues are interconnected. You would have to know the historical factor of that. Cat is attracted to jazz as well, by the way. Cool cat and blues, in fact, are close. Who made that? Maybe. Who knows? Attractiveness, engaging, whereas the blues are sad and gloomy. I once told one of my students, don't use the fact that you're depression. Say you got the blues. You can sing and get rid of those. Depression, you need some kind of chemical or something. Okay. Again, it is not necessary in such network analysis to provide deep details, such as showing all the relevant crisscrossing circuits. Moreover, it is not necessary to show how the vehicle is converted into a noun adjective at this point. I'm going to get to that. Okay. So, well, I'm going to have to do some skipping because I'm running out of time. Okay. Let's take a metaphorical network. People are animals. You've got two network domains, people such as a professor, woman, dad. And you've got another domain such as animals, snake, bear, gorilla, mouse. And in that thing, you've got a connotative network, slyness, danger, whatever these things are. The two are hooked up to create a completely new metaphorical association. I've done a very clean diagram. But most likely, these things are not that clean in the mind. They come by impression, okay? But how would I put it on paper except to make it as clean and as Cartesian as I can? Okay. Now, I come to the concept of how do we go from here to saying things like, that man is a snake in the grass. Keep away from him. And understand it. Well, I'll call it reflexivization. And it's really an organizational feature about systems like language. I see nothing intrinsic about grammar other than it reflects conceptual structure by constraining it in this way. The analogy I use is this one. You buy 1,000 books over a year. Are you going to buy them in alphabetical order according to author? Unlikely. Are you going to buy them according to topic? I'll buy all my math books in January, all my biology books. No. You're going to buy them according to many factors, real life factors. I like this author. Or I'm fascinated by this one here and I want other things. Or I just like this. I was in a store, I like the cover. Take 1,000, throw them in a corner. Find them a year later. You can't. So thanks to John Dewey and his decimal system or what have you, we have a way of taking that kind of lived experience and organizing it so I can find it again. As Vico said, that's memoria. That's exactly what memory is. We can organize it and then think about it in that way. Grammar is a kind of organizing grid, just like any other system of that way is. So how does grammar reflect things like it? How do we get from that to sentences such as, the professor snaked his way around the issue. The professor has a snaky way of doing things. How do we do that? Then I will tell you an experiment I did with mentally handicapped children, which absolutely fascinating a few years back, which can enlighten this whole thing here. Well, you've got a linear structure system. The professor snaked his way around the issue. But below it, you've got professor, which is connected to snakes, which moves before. There's a slyness, there's a danger underneath it. All this is implicit. It is associative, it is not linear. When it goes to the surface, it is organized in such a way that it reflects iconically, sometimes indexically. I've seen indexical reflexivization. And that happens, of course, with time and cause and effect sentences. But in descriptive sentences, it's almost all an iconicity that goes from the bottom to the top. Bottom to the top is, again, another iconic thing. Who knows which way it goes? I would say it goes from somewhere in here to the vocal organs to be delivered. Okay. A new way of thinking of what a rule of grammar is, because a rule of grammar in this case is it's like a rule of art. How do I now configure my thoughts in order to deliver them in such a way that they have true meaning in the situation? In the other case, the professor has a snaky way. It's not moving, but the quality of the snake, the touching of it, which is immersed there. Okay. Now, does this really occur in human discourse? I'm going fast. I'll make it. Does it occur? I'm going to give you some tapes that I've recorded. These were students at the U of T campus about a year ago. The reason why I use snake is because they were talking about a certain professor who was a snake. And here's what student A said. He says, you know, that prof is a real snake. Yeah, I know, he's a real slippery guy. You've heard of the infectiousness of discourse. Once that network is started, it's like a virus. It spreads to everybody in the discourse situation. You can't get around it. Whether you're saying anything meaningful or not is irrelevant. You're saying something that makes sense at that point. And then, yeah, he somehow knows how to slide around a tough situation when confronted. Yeah, keep away from his courses. He bites. These were in sequence. Actually, there may have been some dialogue in between, and I don't remember now. In other words, the connotative circuit underneath there, animals, people, professor, snakes, slippery slides, was triggered, and on it goes. Another student would say things like, I do not see how anyone can swallow his ideas, especially since most of them have gone out of fashion and thus are dying out. This looks like it's just a very interesting rhetorical fashion, but what that speaker is really doing is taking ideas and domain hopping around areas. I'm going to go a little bit quickly here because I'm going to show you what I mean by the infectiousness of discourse. This was recorded by a couple of colleagues of mine. We were having lunch, and while we started talking, I said, do you mind if I turn on a tape recorder? No problem. Here's what one speaker says. I've got to start earning some bread by publishing more trendy stuff. I'm practically on a starvation diet. No matter how you slice it, that's the wave of the future in academia. There's something going on in between, and speaker B said, hey, you're stepping on a sacred cow. But I suppose you're right. Maybe it is time for me to take the bull by the horns. You guys are rotten apples. You can't cut it both ways. This happened during dinner, by the way. Lunch. Makes you think of Jakobson's idea of contact as affecting everything we do. Okay, here's the first circuit, which led to the second one. You can hook it up at starvation, becoming a sacred cow, which adds up to the third one, with the cow being a bull, and it leads on. If you put all these things together, you will see that the whole discourse situation is imbued with circuits that are highly connotative, metaphorical. There is no denotation. I have not recorded a denotative communication ever in my life, unless you're in a language classroom. Now, we come to a kind of concluding thing, but let me tell you before I do that, because what implications does this have for communication theory? But before I do that, let me tell you, I was working with children. What I'm telling you is that the form of a sentence, the linear form, reflects the way we organize things in our world. Not like Wittgenstein pointed it out, but in a kind of, we must put things, the words in a sentence are the objects that Peirce talks about and become signifiers only secondarily. It's a secondary modeling system, if you want. The primary one is iconic. I was dealing with kids, and of course in linguistics there's this thing about the passive, that the passive is simply a transformational form of the active, which is considered more basic. Therefore you go around in your mind with active sentences ready to be transformed into passive according to situation. Now, passives, first of all, appear first in childhood language rather than actives, which is fascinating. I was working with these children who could hardly put words together. This was in a place called L'Aquila in Italy, and this was in Italian. So I'll use the Italian sentences. And we had an object here called, a little toy called a cat, gatto, and over here a rat called ratto. Okay. And the kid is right here with me, and I went, bang, bang, bang. Dico, che fa il gatto? Il gatto mangia il ratto. The poetic aspect, the rhyming, is very crucial with these kids because it enhances memory. It's Jakobson's poetic function. So that was chosen not arbitrarily. It was chosen on purpose. And the kid would say, this was a kid with, I forget what kind of syndrome he had. Anyhow, and he put it together. He went gatto. He went something ama un ratto or something. Fine. I didn't move the kid's position. I turned the two objects around, and I went, che fa? He didn't start with il gatto. You would have assumed After all, if it's an abstract notion of grammar, the subject comes first, right? I turned the two objects around, and he said, il ratto. He knew it wasn't the eater, so he didn't know how to form it, but he made me understand that the ratto was getting eaten by the cat. Got it? So by just turning the positions in the view of sight, what we got there was a passive sentence. Okay. And that happened over and over. By the way, as an anecdote, I presented these results at a conference of doctors, of psychiatrists in Naples. And someone got up, he says, Professor Danesi, that's very interesting. However, in Naples, because the rats are bigger than the cats, they will always be active. Which, if you think about it, that's exactly it, of course. Of course it would have to happen that way. In senses, we would reflect that new reality. Okay. Communication theory, without taking into account the connotative and metaphorical systems that give sense to things, which are born in historical systems, which are changing all the time, could never, any communication theory that doesn't take into account, in my view, will never be able to capture the richness of human discourse. Whether machines can ever do this, to my view, is absolutely impossible, because you have to live. You have to live historically. You got to understand what the blues are. You must have heard them, and so on. So for me, and I'm going to be critical, I'm going to end up saying the cognitive sciences are going the wrong way. They should be focusing more on those things which are intangible, such as connotation and metaphorical. And I will stop there, and thank you very much for your